Or with David Dodd, you don't get many opportunities to get a biotech CEO on. Um, David, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
Before we get into the company, because we do have quite a few questions. David, how does one go about selecting a CRO for a clinical trial? Because that's got to be one of the hardest things I think as a biotech CEO of like all these CROs claim to do the same thing and ultimately very few of them deliver. What what is your thought? What are your thoughts on these?
Sure. It's something that we spend obviously a lot of time doing because we have three products, two of which are vaccines, one is a cancer therapy, all advancing either in phase two or they're advancing into a pivotal trial, that type of thing. Obviously, in each case, we need CROs because we have an internal medical clinical team with experience. We have a director of clinical operations who has significant experience managing CROs, in different pharmaceutical companies. And our areas of expertise in terms of knowledge-based therapeutically are either in oncology, where we have an oncologist on staff, or in infectious disease vaccines. And there again, we have someone who's an expert in infectious disease vaccines and dealing with the whole area of infectious disease care. And so from that stand, and they've all been involved in many different selections of CROs over their careers and all. For me, it's actually not a big deal because I delegate. It's their job. I don't get involved. I sign off when they make the decision of the CRO. They will they brief myself and the other members of our leadership team on why they're recommending a particular CRO and that type of thing. And we obviously review the contract, those things. But it really is their responsibility, and then we look very closely at the performance and whatever history we may have had with them. And in one particular instance, we didn't have to do anything because the HHS BARDA selected the CRO. We had a CRO in our proposal, and we received this award last summer. Is valued at $400 million in terms of a major phase 2B study, 10,000 patients, comparing our next generation COVID-19 vaccine to the Moderna vaccine. And in that one, the government is funding on our behalf directly the CRO, but it's the CRO that we had in our proposal. So we went through usually the process of putting an RFP together. Within that RFP, we want to know what is the experience in the particular therapeutic area that we're talking about. If someone pitches for it and they say we've never done vaccines or we haven't done oncology and we're pitching for our Gedeptin in oncology, then that's a disqualifier, right away. So we look at their experience. We always
Chris is
ask.
licking his chops. Like, Chris, as somebody who maybe own a CRA, I'm asking for a friend, CRO, how do you pitch a biotech CEO properly? First of all, do you welcome cold email pitches, or would you prefer they meet you at a conference, or what's the best way? And maybe if you want to share like which CROs you're using, if you're allowed to disclose that.
Well, it's all the above. We meet CROs. Well, first of all, there's so many every day. There are incoming emails of introductions of CROs, as you're well aware. So they're always marketing themselves. Every conference which we attend uh, is inundated with CROs. If you go to Biotech Showcase in San Francisco in the early part of January, tied in with the JP Morgan conference, seems like the majority of the stands, if you want to call them that, or kiosks, are from CROs. And so there are lots of them. We go to the World Vaccine Congress, pardon me, and there are CROs from all over the world there. We attend the World Vaccine Congress Europe. That's always in the fall. Again, it's inundated with CROs. Bio Europe, which is both in the spring, it'll be coming up week after next, and then also in the fall. That one is heavily inundated, heavily represented by CROs. So we meet with them. We usually, if we're not in the market to select a CRO, usually when we're registering, because you do the one-on-ones or scheduling stuff, we put in there we're not interested in meetings with CDMOs because we have our
Ah.
contract manufacturing partners already in place. We work with two, and we say we're not interested in any CROs. So we tell them right up front, if you reach out to us, we're just going to decline a meeting because we meet.
Report
And
as spam.
yeah, exactly. And so we do that. We've worked previously, we've been working with Elucent, which is the combination of the former SMS Cato and Pharmalon. So SMS Cato was more in oncology. Pharmalon was more infectious diseases. We've worked with them in infectious diseases. We're Ergomed, we've worked with. They have a strong experience in oncology as well as other areas. I have a history of working with Ergomed, both in a large, very large pivotal phase 3 trial historically, as well as in a pivotal trial that led the product registration in endocrinology. Again, my role in that was my clinical team was looking for some introductions in oncology, and I said you may want to look at this company Ergomed. I said I know their founder. Haven't talked to him in several years, but worked with them in oncology before, and this was for an oncology trial, and so I left it up to them from there on. And as it proceeded, I learned that that was their preferred, recommended one. So that's how we do. We meet them in many different ways, but conferences are a lead area, or I'll call it the traditional networking, where someone will say, have who, someone on our team may say, I've worked with so and so before. And so from that standpoint, as I said, we have a director of clinical operation that her job is to manage the CROs with whom we work.
I see. And that person reports directly to you, or is there
No,
another?
no, no. That person reports into our chief medical officer.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. So before we get into the stuff, because there's a pipeline of things, there's people are interested in certain things related to the stock. I wanted to give the research sites watching, which is a huge component of the audience, just like 3 to 5 more minutes maybe of some advice for them. Are there any studies that you don't have to actually give specifics, but are there any opportunities for research sites to work with GeoVax in the foreseeable future? And if so, and maybe this is a good segue into what's in the pipeline, what therapeutic indications, et cetera, besides Mpox, of course.
Sure. Well, we would not be the driver of that because the CROs are responsible, obviously, for picking the sites. Our clinical trial, for instance, for Mpox, will have sites in the U.S., in Europe, and in Africa. For obvious reasons. No, obviously the latter type thing. The oncology phase 2 trial that we will be initiating and rolling out over the next year. We've selected the CRO, the protocols being finalized, got to produce product, and all, but that will include sites in, I'll call it US, perhaps North America, which would mean some in Canada, but also in Europe. So the
Right.
oncology one will be in that, and we haven't announced who we've selected on that, and so I don't want to do it now because then I'd have to put a press release out. So
Yeah,
so
yeah, no.
do that, and then with Elucent has already selected. I mean, they are not selecting any new sites with the COVID-19 studies they're doing for the Project Next Gen, the large BARDA funded trial. That one, there are 80 sites all in the US. They've all been confirmed. They haven't all signed contracts, so some of them may end up, it may,
Mm.
these lawyers get into it and that you may not get a signed contract. You got to
You
pay the
may get Chris involved in some of those. He
contract.
negotiates for 1/5 of the sites in the United States, I think.
And so there are people who have clinical site facilities. That's their business. And I know of some of those because they have let me know. I didn't reach out to them. I didn't play any role, but some of them have let me know,
Yes.
hey, we're part of one of your programs because we've been hired by your CRO. And
Yes,
that
yes.
doesn't come about from us doing that. Just simply was told because I have to
That's
know
me
the.
and Chris. That's our business. We own some of these sites. So just we're gonna move on to the pipeline, but I know there's a CRO and yeah, they are the ones. But let's say a site reaches out to you on LinkedIn or something, says, David, I watched your podcast, amazing. Listen, can you consider my site? Like, if you really recommend them, do they jump the line with that CRO, or is it a clear chain of command they gotta follow?
Well, it all depends. If, for instance, under the Project NextGen, the large program, there the CRO was selected, was selected, but it was the one we had in our proposal by BARDA. They're funding they're paying for it directly on our behalf, and that's clearly all run by the CRO. On the other ones, if they're, I would say the way we would handle it, because I very big on this. I don't meddle in other people's. That's why I hire them. Is if I had some, I would forward such an email to our clinical team.
So what you're telling me is there is maybe a chance.
Yeah, there's a chance. There's a potential opportunity. There was a colleague I've known for a number of years near where I live that owns a site and has done. I ended up selling it, to a larger company and all. As soon as his time period was up for not, competing, he started another one. And I recommended him. It was at another company, but I forwarded his capabilities. I said, vet him, do whatever you normally do. It's just someone that I know. He seems to have a good business, so it tells me if you have a good business, then that means you must be satisfying your clients. So I sent it to them, and he ended up becoming part of a site. That again, that was a former company, but it was timely when he reached out to me. I forwarded on. I did not recommend it, and I emphasized to them, this is your, this will be your call. If he doesn't perform, you can't point your finger at me and say, I picked him, because I didn't pick him. I just said you may want to talk to him.
Gotcha. Chris, look what's on the agenda still for David, all right? We've got their pipeline, which is their phase two vaccine candidate, which we discussed. They're working on cancer therapies. There's buzz around Trump's Stargate AI partnership, and there's also um, like a biodefense focus clearly, and I wanted to get your take on RFK and how that impacts GeoVax. But before I get into any of this, Chris, is there anything you still like from a site perspective want to ask David maybe as we shift gears into a more economic
No, I
conversation?
think we've covered that. I would be curious to see how you would have any involvement with Stargate.
Let's do it. All the boss, man.
Let me comment one thing.
Yes.
Every biotech CEO I know, and I've talked with there's six vaccines that have been put in this project NextGen. Each one of them are funded similar to what we were funded, about around the same amount. So 10,000 patients, it costs you 10,000 patients. No matter what the program is, the number one complaint of every CEO when it comes to their clinical thing is the disappointing pace of recruitment and enrollment. And I'm sure, you guys have heard that time and time again. But that is the number one issue when CEOs get together. And I've asked them, I said, what, you're doing a clinical trial, you're doing a phase two, we're doing a phase two. What's your number one issue? And it just is always slower. It's always frustrating. I've come to the conclusion that the CRO primarily manages the data that comes out in the operational aspects, and it's the people, for instance, such as Yuma Clinical Research, that are
Whoa.
actually pulling patients in that are the ones, or if it's an academic setting, it's at that medical center that you're doing to pull them in, and that I've come to the conclusion that going forward, any trials we do will have an additional aspect, which is to work very closely with every site that we have, and not leave it up to the CRO.
Every Thank you for sharing. That's a common theme we're getting from a lot of biotech, whether micro cap, small cap, mid caps. The technology is empowering you guys and gals back to the driver's seat in a way. Because for a few decades, you just complete outsource. We don't know what's going on. Don't know nothing. Then the FDA comes and holds you responsible.
Exactly, it's your baby. Well, and that's part of where AI comes in, because what we're trying to utilize is AI. Not only we're utilizing it in the design of the trials, because we look at not only when we're talking infectious diseases, we not only look at antibody responses because of the technology we utilize for all of our infectious disease vaccines, the whole cellular immunity or T cell generations and what are the good. There are not good markers for efficacy or lack thereof in evaluating cellular immunity as we've all become accustomed to utilizing, and the FDA agrees with the different markers when you're talking antibody or neutralizing antibody responses. So we're utilizing AI in those aspects because you have to design what types of assays you're going to have. You've got to have the basis for that. That may guide you on how you design the trial. So we're utilizing it for that. We're utilizing it for ways of picking sites. We're asking our CROs to do that and not just do it out of convenience who they've done before. So we're looking at in certain, is there a certain distribution of either the cancers we're addressing or the infectious diseases we're addressing, certain subpopulations that we need to go after. We're developing our COVID-19 vaccine, for instance, specifically to be the preeminent vaccine for people with compromised immune systems. And the reason why is the mRNA vaccine, so the Pfizer, the Moderna, and also the Novavax vaccines for COVID-19 do not work for people who have weakened immune systems, whose bodies no longer mount much of a response to antibody stimulation. Our vaccine actually induces a very strong T cell response, and we have clinical data that shows that it works better in certain populations than, for instance, the Pfizer. The Pfizer vaccine failed, ours worked. So that becomes a very important differentiator. But in designing any clinical trials for that, we need to ensure that we're also looking at where patients with certain subpopulation diseases where they're located. And again, that gets into all this utilization of AI. Because at the end of the day, how fast you can complete a clinical program, is absolutely critical. And it can take forever for different reasons, or if you can find ways to speed it up. And it isn't just by identifying where to do the trials, but are there elements for certain biomarkers that you can utilize? So we're
Yeah.
very much involved in all those aspects of utilizing AI.
I'm curious about the AI, if I may. So, these tools ultimately become ubiquitous. There's probably a early adopter advantage as far as, I mean, it's probably proportionate to CapEx spending, but are you using off-the-shelf stuff or just contracting strategically with vendors and providers? Or are you guys doing this like in-house?
We are trying, well, we don't, we use some AI in-house to tee certain things up and all, but we don't have the staff to sort of go real deep. So what we have been doing the last 2 years is talking to firms that claim they are AI experts focused on let's say the areas of biotech or life sciences and this and it's as simple as will tell me at the very beginning it was myself, two other people asking the principals of these firms, all who are very bright, AI oriented people. So, okay, we want to do a clinical trial among these type of patients. Where would AI come in? Tell us what you can do. And then our clinical team and our R&D team are saying, well, we need to look at it because we need to be able to work in conjunction with the FDA and reach agreement on certain biomarkers. Because if you're utilizing a technology as we do that utilizes the cellular immune system as well as the antibody immune system, most vaccines focus almost solely on what they do to the antibody. Well, we're paving new pathways. So we're sometimes in discussions with people about FDA or other regulatory authorities about what to do. Here again, we're utilizing who has that, and we're seeking out guidance literally all over the world. We've just recently established our first footprint in the UK out of the Oxford University area, but it's really our footprint for all of the UK. We have members on our scientific advisory board now. We're talking with groups that are experts in T cell analyses and stuff. They're in the UK. So we're pulling all of that in. And our business model is have people who have sufficient knowledge, experience, and expertise to be able to appropriately manage those activities that we're doing. Otherwise, we're just
Yeah.
depending on what someone says they
This
can.
is, I feel like we're getting a glimpse into the future of our industry by analyzing the strategy of these microcaps. Because, I mean, you're not going to get the CEO of Eli Lilly on here. I've tried to talk to us about, bringing things in-house, but they're doing it. Do
Sure.
you think, David, it's actually the small caps doing the early innovating, not from the drug discovery, but from processes, and then the big pharma kind of copies, or is it the opposite? Is it vice versa right now?
I think it's a combination of both. Because what the large pharma in my career, I was, I've led at big pharma. I mean, before when Wyeth was the basis that Pfizer acquired that put them into the vaccines. I ran the Wyeth's U.S. pharmaceutical and vaccine business past in my.
My first study in '05 was a Wyeth schizophrenia study. It didn't
So,
work, but yeah, I got my first start as a site owner.
okay. So from those types of programs, big pharma traditionally does same thing that they do in their pipeline. Because the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine came from BioNTech, small biotech company out of Germany. They did a deal, brought it in. What did they bring? They brought muscle behind it, investment behind it to drive it through, get it registered, and then had their commercial rights. And BioNTech had Europe, that type of thing. So that's what I would say that traditional pharma has always been good at is because they've got much deeper pockets, great resources, but they've built largely their success, most successful, if I'm not mistaken, over two-thirds of the successful blockbusters that have come out of over the decades out of pharma were picked up by pharma by other people. Gilead's antiviral drugs were not produced out of research and development at Gilead. They actually brought them in from Emory University as
Hmm.
well as Pharmaset and other
Hmm.
companies. Nothing wrong with that. That's what they're good at doing, you see.
Right.
And so what small companies, for instance, the companies that we are working with related to utilizing AI and being able to understand and be able to map out and hopefully together we can all reach agreement with regulatory authorities of what are the appropriate biomarker assays to utilize that give you insight and this is indicating efficacy or this is indicating non-efficacy. That's really being driven by smaller entrepreneurial companies.
Gotcha. And we will now focus on, well, some of the other questions we had was,
Well, before we move to anything
yeah,
else,
go ahead, go ahead.
so you had mentioned that one of the top concerns, of course, for yourself as well as other CEOs is recruitment from sites, right? That's one of the main constraints on finishing your project, um, whatever phase of study that might be. So I've brought this up a few times with other CEOs or higher up execs. What's wrong with designing a study to kind of spur on sites to recruit more and pay more attention to your study? Because generally the dynamic is sites are going to pay attention to studies or recruit more exclusively for studies that pay well, right? What if you were to design, and you could pass this along to the other CEOs you're speaking with, what if you were to design a study, and some sponsors have done this, I've seen these budgets, in which there is reward for A, completing a patient, or B, meeting a certain step in the study, you get a bonus, right, as a site. I'm telling you, your recruitment numbers would significantly increase in this situation. If you were to say to a site, hey, here's your budget, there is no negotiating this budget. It's 20,000 a completed patient or whatever it might be, which is a reasonably fair budget, but you're going to get double that for each completed patient. So 20,000 a completed patient plus another 20,000 a completed patient. Um, or if they meet a certain midway point that the data is somewhat reasonable for you, it means something for you, even if the patient does drop out. Obviously, the best patients are the completed patients for your data set. What do you think of something like that, David?
One, we've done it before.
And does it help?
Two, it works. Depending if now in some jurisdictions that would be illegal, so we couldn't do it in certain areas in
Mm-hmm.
Europe. You have to be aware of that. If you're dealing in an area where most of your patient populations are going to be handled out of academic medical centers, which we've had that before, where we're dealing with advanced head and neck cancer patients who, not to try and cure it, but just trying to improve their last stage of life.
Hmm.
There's certain institutional prohibitions in that
Yeah.
instances. They will allow you that you can't carve it out, so it's just driving the patients in there, but you can make contributions and to support the analytical lab at those institutions, that type of thing. So there are different ways that you can do it. If it's a classic, or if it, I don't know if it's a classic, if it's an area and your trial is dealing with, sites or traditional physician offices that also are heavily involved in clinical sites, or if it's a clinical site operation such as yours or others, the ones I've known in the Charleston, South Carolina area, et cetera, those things. There's some here in the low country where I live here. Then you can find ways of supporting it. But again, it can be tricky because if you're doing a mix of that, then you may have some of your sites where you can't do that and other sites where you can.
Hmm.
But I know where I know of some examples where it worked very well and it was laid out. I mean, it had to go through a lot of review and IRB and all that type of stuff, be able to do it. But yes, we had a very disappointing experience where just there were no patients coming in and there was no activity on behalf of the CRO did not see it as their responsibility to do anything except handle as patients came into the trial. And that was when they picked them up. But the key was
Ridiculous.
we got to stimulate and get more patients in here.
I
Yep.
gotta plug patientace.com, but anyways, we can talk about that
So you
another
really have
time.
to So you have to figure out they tried a few things, none of which were successful. But I will say that is the number one. I was at a meeting internationally, and another CEO who also is in this big BARDA trial, the Next Generation Project Next Gen out of HHS. I was having dinner with him. So that's one third of the there's six products in that program. Two of the CEOs sitting there. And I asked him, I said, what bothers you the most on clinical trials? He said, the pace of patients. I said, amen. I said, it's so frustrating. I get so mad at CROs all the time about that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. There's a
What,
number of
I'm just
ways.
curious, who do you guys get more mad at, though? Just be honest. Sites or CROs? If you had to pick only one.
well, when a CRO pitches, they tell you how they can manage the sites to get your patients.
Gotcha.
I don't make a contract with the sites, as a
Gotcha.
client. Mine are with the CRO.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Disappointment then goes to the CROs and goes from that regard. And unless what I've said is, and I've done this before at other companies, if you're a larger company and you have a nice MSL, Medical Science Liaison Organization, and you've got to try, you're going to assign those that are in that therapeutic area to be going there much more frequently than the CRAs from the CRO. And I think that's a very important element. But if you're a small biotech company and you're a company of 25 people, then and you're reliant on these others, that's why we do this. We've got people who manage CROs very successfully. They're not pushovers. They do that, but again, you work through that. So it really comes down. I think the most important thing is before you assign the CRO, you have that discussion with them. Now, what is it you're going to do? Because the sites aren't yours. The sites belong to other people. It may be a site company, it may be an academic institutional, but what are you going to do to ensure that there's high awareness and interest and flow? Basically to focus on identifying patients that qualify for this trial and then moving those forward into the process. I
Well,
mean, gotta look.
unfortunately, CROs don't play a huge role in mitigating or helping uh, recruitment, right? It really boils down to site selection.
Exactly.
Uh, and even then, you can select a great site, many patients for the trial, but then the site itself is making their decisions recruitment wise on really what's the number one driver of most anything, and it's the dollars, right? If they
Site,
have,
a site company that's got, I don't know, 50 sites around the US, whatever. One of their senior individuals recently said to me, he said, you realize, this is a site company.
Mhm.
He said, you realize CROs make the highest margin when patients aren't coming into the trial because they're still billing you monthly for
Yep,
them to prepare, but they're not expending any money because there's nothing to be done. And I
yep.
said, exactly what I've been complaining of. That's what I said. And
That's
he confirmed
that's
it.
where as a sponsor, you need to play a pivotal role in making sure these budgets align with what the
Exactly.
sites need or want. And really, I've had these conversations with small sponsors many times, and I think that, in my opinion, if you really want to drive recruitment, your budget should be minimal, but should to the sites, right? Initially, and it should be driven based on performance, right? The more patients you can get, the more patients you can keep in the trial, your budget is exponential at that point. But yeah, the CROs, they're not in this for you, they're in it for themselves as well.
I agree.
Yep. And they're going to make bigger dollars if they can delay the onset of patient recruitment. And those dollars really are greater when they're doing minimal work. So they're paying little in salary, and
Exactly right.
they're driving you to pay them for doing much of nothing.
Spoken like the panelist at Save Our Sites financial panel.
Yeah, we're not going to
Interesting.
probably get into that too much, but
SaveOurSites.com. David, your mission seems to align with the biodefense focus of the Trump administrations and figures like RFK. How do you see their health reform ideas impacting GeoVax, if at all? Chris, I had to do it. We had to get a little spicy on this one.
Yeah, no, we before new administration came in, but they had indicated who was hopefully going to be confirmed. No, we looked at where do we align or misalign with these individuals. And you see, our technology, for instance, from infectious disease vaccines has been around since about 1970. So there's no surprises here. And there's been quite a bit of discussions, and a lot of individuals, have had questions, concerns about mRNA. Has it been fully vetted? It's a new technology. It was rushed through. All those things people say. And I don't know what the truth is there because that's not my job. I focus on GeoVac. But what I do know is that we have a technology that is well recognized around the world for being exquisitely safe. It does not replicate in humans, which means it has minimal to no risk of a person getting a vaccine from a infectious disease vaccine, be it COVID, be it the Ebola vaccine, be it a Zika virus, whatever it is. They are exquisitely safe. In fact, we've been granted exemptions by regulatory authorities, including the FDA, to not have to conduct some of the traditional animal toxicology studies to show that something is going to be safe because it's so inherently safe. So we looked at that and we said that's a plus for us. And that ties in with all this biosecurity also, because in biosecurity, they're looking that the number one threat is smallpox, which now we get back into our vaccine that we talked about, Mpox, because it's the same vaccine. And we utilize that same technology for every infectious disease vaccine, which means our COVID-19 vaccine inherently also conveys protection against Mpox. The point is that the quickest, it traditionally was 10 to 15 years to develop a vaccine.
yep,
Fastest any clinical program led to registration was 5 years. And in 10 months, they got vaccines out there with the shortcomings that we all acknowledge today, in the questions that people may still have. Okay, they're there, but it did sort of halt what I would say was the tsunami of SARS-CoV-2 that was occurring. It seemed to be everywhere.
You're out there working, David.
You got
Excellent. You're the
thank
people CEO. The people demand a CEO like this that's retail investor focused. Is not just for the big institutions, for you guys and gals.